Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. I'm Michelle Hirschberger. I'm the Vice President this year for the MGMA Kansas chapter. And thank you for joining this afternoon for our November webinar. Today's sponsor is MedPro. As the nation's first provider of healthcare liability insurance, MedPro Group has protected its assets and reputations of healthcare companies since 1899. With over 1.5 billion in annual premiums and more than 300,000 clients, MedPro Group is the national leader in customized insurance, claims, and patient safety and risk solutions for physicians, surgeons, dentists, and other healthcare professionals, as well as hospitals, senior care, and other facilities. Please watch this short video that they have provided.
You didn't choose this career for prestige, or awards, or recognition. No, you chose it because you care, plain and simple. You could have taken an easier path, shorter hours, less stress, nice, predictable days. But you didn't. You chose to serve. When you're needed, you're there. For a warm welcome, a helping hand, or a new perspective. You're there because it's who you are. Some people may not get it, but we do. At MedPro Group, we're committed to helping you fulfill your mission. We were founded on the belief that those who care for and protect others should be free to do so without wondering if they themselves are protected. We believed that in 1899 when we first defended healthcare providers, and we believe it today. Because when the unexpected occurs, you need an ally to protect you, your livelihood, and your peace of mind. So carry on confidently in the big moments and the small ones, the victories, the not quites, and the new beginnings. Be there for those who need you, and we'll be there for you.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, I wanted to thank again MedPro for sponsoring today's speaker. We're going to be hearing from Stephanie Moore on unconscious bias, are invisible influence lenses of bias that distort what's real. Welcome, Stephanie.
All right, Michelle. Well, thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen and then get my camera set up. And John, give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay. All right, very good. Well, I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you, everyone, for making this happen. And I know I've worked here with Phil and John and Michelle, and then also Dee was responsible for kind of making that connection. So I thank you all for all that you've done. And I'm excited to be here and get this conversation started. So I typically, when I do live trainings, I really like it to be a conversation. So be a little bit informal, but this format creates it where I'm doing most of the talking, but I still want to hear from you. So as we get into this topic of invisible influences, unconscious bias, I'd like to learn a little bit about you. So I'm going to launch a poll here, and you have to bear with me as I navigate my screen here. And if we get the technology working, we'll know everything else works perfectly fine after that. At least that's what I'm hoping. Okay, so let's look at this poll. It says, tell me about yourself. What best describes your current role. So if you'll go ahead and select something there, you should see the poll. I won't leave it up for too long, but I'd like to learn a little bit about yourself. And as you're doing that, I'll tell you who I am. Well, I am a senior certified HR professional. That's just what those letters mean, and somebody thinks I'm qualified to do my job, but you get to decide after. But you'll see my information there if you want to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I love talking about this topic of unconscious bias and all things HR. So you can find me at Stephanie Moore HR when you search at LinkedIn. But I spend a lot of my time doing a variety of HR consulting for a company called Wolf Prairie. I will go ahead as I'm talking. I'm going to go ahead and end this poll, and then we're going to share, and everybody can see where we all kind of fall in. So everyone here is leaders in their organization at the supervisor management level or administrator. So that is perfect. So I'm happy that no one selected the unknowns with too many hats. I've been there sometimes in my career, but glad everyone is here. I'm going to stop sharing the results. And so just so you know how I spend my time, I help organizations with compliance issues and HR best practices. Occasionally I will say I have a job that nobody wants because I spend a lot of time doing handbook work. And that's definitely something that over the years I've tried to get out of, and then I come back to it, and definitely have had quite a few clients over the years in the healthcare industry. So I'm absolutely willing to have conversations with you and discuss, especially this concept of invisible influences afterwards. But one of the things I just love doing is teaching HR. And occasionally I will get a company who has a new HR person. Maybe they've been thrown that responsibility onto their plate and they just need a little bit of help. So I'll come in a 12 session slide and, or excuse me, I was reading and talking. I can see that, yes, the slides, we're going to make those available hopefully next week, but I will come in and do a 12 session program to help new people to the HR field to kind of quickly assess what they need help with and hopefully do that quick knowledge transfer. So that's a little bit about me. I'm glad to learn a little bit about you. And like I said, this is designed to be informal. If you want to chat something in, I do try to watch it. So we can stop me with any questions, but we'll also give you an opportunity at the end. Okay, so here, let's get started. Just imagine with me that shortly after you're born, someone put a pair of eyeglasses on your face. Also, imagine that those lenses, those glasses, they were not clear, but they were rather quite an obvious shade of pink. Try to imagine with me that every day as you grew up, you saw the world only through those pink lenses. If you were outside on a summer day and saw a grassy field and green trees, it would look something like this. If you were with your parents at the beach and you saw your first sunset, it would look something like this. Still beautiful and inspiring, even though you have your pink lenses on. In the winter, you might stroll through snowy woods, but the white scene is still going to look a little bit like this. So fast forward with me and imagine that you've grown up and you're finally able to remove those pink lenses for the very first time. Can you imagine the shock you'd feel when the world came into view? Wouldn't it be amazing to finally clearly see those sparkling white snow, true blues and greens of nature, and the pure artistry of a sunset? Well, that's really a pretty extreme example, but I think it's a great way to think about this concept of unconscious bias. It's like having colored lenses on that just distort what's real. They just distort it. You see, lenses of bias cause us to see the world and others. That's the big piece, and others, in a way that's just not entirely true to reality. We call these influences invisible because over time, we don't even realize we have these lenses of bias on. We can't see them in ourselves, but you know what's strange? We can see them in other people. And the longer we wear them, they just feel more natural. So what do you notice here in this photo? If you're like most, what stands out is the purple lenses, right? You just see them right away. And it's funny that it really just is easier to see it in others than ourselves. But part of my goal today is that we begin to remove those lenses and start to see things in ourselves maybe a little bit different so we can take some action. This issue of lenses go by a lot of different names. You have implicit bias, prejudice, blind spots, even unintentional preferences, flawed assumptions, brain shortcuts. That's the one that I hear often. So this is what we're talking about when we say invisible influences, lenses of bias. They go by a lot of different names. So during our time together, we're going to focus on topics throughout our time by answering 6 key questions. Who has them? What are they? Why does this happen? And then most importantly, for what we deal with on a day-to-day basis is why focus on them at work. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what managers, those in leadership within your organization, need to know. And then we'll end our time with talking about what we can do about them, give us some practical tips. Okay, I'm going to launch another poll here. And what I'll tell you about the polls as we go through them, these polls are really designed for you. My goal is that after we spend our time together and you go through the polls, you're going to have a little bit of a roadmap of what are the steps next for you to take for yourself and your organization. So when you answer these questions, go ahead and think back to them. This is really almost for your own information, so you'll have a guide of where should we take action about bias in our organization. So here's the question: how would you rate awareness in your organization about the reality of unconscious bias on a scale of 1 to 10? And I can see that most of us are have kind of put in their selection there. I'm pretty quick at trying to end these fast, so I will go ahead and end that here. But go ahead and add your opinion there, and then we'll share. I like the results here. You can see we all are feeling about 8. I love that there aren't any 1s or 3s. So there is an awareness. So that's a great place to springboard, to have a good foundation. But that is good when you think about what your organization is aware of. So with that, let's look at this first topic of who has them. When we talk about this, we found that many training programs about bias or prejudice cause people to kind of put up a shield, and they say things like, I'm not a racist, I'm not biased, back off. But here's the little secret that science has shown us. You'll see there's science. We all wear lenses of bias to some extent. We have a super professional, formal pie chart to show you what we have found in our own super scientific research at Wolf Prairie. 100% of us have biases that really do distort how we see the world and we see others. Know that this is natural, it's normal, it's just a condition that really does affect everyone. So there's no need to feel defensive. We all have those automatic responses. But if you're not convinced, I have a little exercise I'd like you to participate with me in. I'm going to ask that you imagine in your mind a construction worker. Okay, everybody got a construction worker in their mind? I'm going to add a few details to your picture. This individual has an orange battered hard hat. Imagine that your construction worker is serious, they're determined, they have a determined facial expression. They're wearing a black and gray flannel shirt. The other detail of this construction worker is their sleeves are rolled up with black work gloves on. And they have faded and worn blue jeans. And then the last detail, imagine that this person is kneeling, wiring together steel rebar for a concrete job. Okay, you got your image in your mind? Is this what you saw? Well, if you're like many people, it is not. This one, even though it's 100% accurate of the descriptions I gave you, this often is an unconscious bias. If you're like many, you've imagined, someone says they pictured a male, and you're absolutely right. People often have a gender in mind. They don't think of a young Asian female. And they think of different races as well. You know, what's interesting about this is unconscious bias is not always morally wrong. They're just these automatic responses or assumptions that we tend to make. I want to share with you another illustration that really brings this home. There's a person by the name of Kristen Pressner. She's the global head of HR at Roche Diagnostic. She told her story in a TED Talk. And let me tell you a little bit about her. She's responsible for 7,000 employees in 4 continents. Her job, what's interesting, is she ensures fair treatment for all employees. She also has a responsibility to promote equality, diversity in the workplace. And then what's really key about her background is she's responsible for giving women more opportunities in leadership. But one day she recognized she had a shocking bias she didn't even know she had. She received requests in this very same week from 2 of her members, her team members, to evaluate their pay. One was from a man and one was from a woman. Her response to the man was very clear. Sure, I'll look at it. But her response from the woman, I'm pretty sure you're good. And she discovered that she had an underlying belief or invisible influences telling her that men are providers and women are supporters. She unconsciously saw the man as a provider for their families, so she took his requests more seriously. She recognized this was a serious problem because she was supposed to enforce equality, promote diversity, and help women advance. So she knew she was not supposed to be part of the problem. Here's the even more shocking part of this story. Kristen is the sole financial provider for her family. Her husband stays home full-time with their 4 children. And even though her daily routine was drastically different, she still had invisible influences coloring how she viewed men and women in the workplace. If this behavior or thought process was left unchecked, she definitely could have issues in how she treated others, led people, made decisions, and she was very courageous in telling her story. But it's a great way to demonstrate just how invisible our biases can really be. This reminds me of a story of an obesity study. They found that with doctors who specialized in obesity, anybody heard this? You can maybe even raise your hand or say yes. That those doctors who had understanding that obesity comes from both genetic and environmental causes that impacted this, they still had unconscious biases against obese people. And so they associated them with terrible stereotypes like being lazy and even uneducated. So we're not immune from this. It's important to realize that we do all have lenses that distort what's real about the people around us. These assumptions, they are real. And so I ask that you just remain open to thinking about what might be in your own lenses of bias. As I wrap up this introduction section, I want to make it clear that my goal is not to fix your biases. That will take some time to learn and think differently. But instead, my goal is that we start to realize that we absolutely can intercept them before they impact others around us. All right, so here's my next question for you. And this, again, it's for your path on maybe what is next in your organization as you address unconscious bias, these invisible influences. This next one is, who do you think, wait, I got to relaunch the poll because I started sharing the results before we even started. Okay, there we go. Who do you believe your employees would generally say they see the most lenses of bias in others? Is that at the patient level, coworkers, physician, management team, or maybe it's someone else? Go ahead and put your information in there, and then I will share that closely. This is just for your information, and it'll be interesting to see where others stand on it as well. So let's turn our attention to what these invisible influences might be in real life. Here we go. Well, we talked about their different labels for them, unconscious bias and prejudice. We call them a lot of different things, but in our organization, we have identified 4 primary bias areas. So let me go ahead and share, though, before we go into those details, what everyone is saying where they see that there is a lot of bias. All right, so patients kind of up there at the top, but then coworkers, physicians, and when I think I really look at those, we're pretty even when we compare what's going on. And I had a client recently, when I see that patients are at the top of that, we have, I oversee our anti-harassment training prevention program called Workplace of Respect, and we have a hotline. So sometimes organizations will, if employees, it's a neutral place, a third party where people can report things. And it was a healthcare practice, and an individual was complaining about the patients, and that they're, from a racial standpoint, what they were wearing to the office. And this was a patient that was there on a regular basis, and the things that it was creating for other employees. And it's very difficult. You know that, I don't have to tell you, but in the capacity that you're serving in, when it comes from the patients, how are you going to handle that? Well, each situation is different, but I really encourage you that the more you create that culture and that environment within your people that you employ and with your leadership, it often does spill over, and then you really can manage things if it is the patient that is part of the problem. Usually then the employee knows where the employer stands, and then it helps you kind of manage that and mitigate it a little bit. So I'd like to share with you Wolf Prairie's analysis of unconscious bias. So with this, I'd like to start with how we categorize and recognize our own personal issues and biases. We have a model of a set of biases that we've assembled into these 4 general areas. We have individual, philosophical, positional, and relational. With that, what you'll see is they're put around a circle, and each one has a definition. Individual is defined as observable physical traits, characteristics, or capabilities. The philosophical area, we call it biases that are based on a person's fundamental beliefs, philosophies, and view of the world. Then the positional one, and I can see I'm a little slow on my clicking there. There we go, it's working now. The positional area is defined as a person's status within society or within organizations, and so how we kind of interact based on that. And then the final category is relational. It's bias based on a person's views, practices related to gender, sexuality, and relationship. With our model, we put you at the center, and I'll explain that in just a moment. But you can see there you are at the center. Then we have 12 categories along what looks like a clock. And we aren't going to go into those details here, but you can see which ones are listed there. And each category has a great potential for bias to play out in the workplace. And that's why we've identified these 12 key areas. As you look at this, when you look at these 12 categories, oftentimes we unconsciously, when we're around another person, we automatically make an assumption about the differences. So whether that's related to age, race, religion, those types of things, and you can see each one of those listed there. When we encounter someone who is most like us, we feel very, very comfortable with them. And we call that our affinity zone. So they're very similar to me. I just have a natural reaction to them. You sometimes can experience this if you are from the same town or you went to the same school. For whatever reason, now that person just seems pretty good, even though you have nothing else in common. But they're like you. So this high level of similarity, which causes us to favor those people, when we see that, it's a positive bias towards them, but really the individuals don't deserve it, and in the workplace it can create additional issues. In addition, when we encounter another person, behind the scenes, our brains are assessing all 12 categories for what is similar to our own. For example, when we see differences in appearance, maybe political, when they're really similar, you can see in this particular one where we see the arrows and they have differences, that person's pretty close to me. And so I'm pretty comfortable with them because they're pretty similar in beliefs. That example there, their appearance and age is a little bit different. But let me add one more element to this diagram to help us consider this factor of bias and how it plays out in the real world. It's something that we call the comfort zone. We all have a comfort zone when it comes to interacting and relating to people across all the 12 bias categories. For some, the zone may be quite large, maybe due to significant exposure, maybe even when we have situations where we've had more experiences with an individual that may even be very, very different than myself, like in this model. You can see gender and education, but I'm still pretty comfortable because I've had enough exposure over time. Comfort zones are really interesting in that we each have a different shaped one, right? Just look at the stories that we tell of our life experiences, what we've been exposed to, what we understand, and we see differences in others. But you know, it's interesting as you look at each of those comfort zones, they're a little bit like a fingerprint. They are very different. But the best news about our comfort zone is it is not like a fingerprint. We have the option to change it, and it can change over time. Our organization's in the process of developing an assessment tool so we can kind of see those changes over time. But as we think about this concept, it really does help us to consider, you know, am I having a bias in this area? Am I comfortable? Have I had more exposure? And let me go ahead, I'm going to launch another poll. When we talk about these 12 areas, just your initial reaction. Do you think in your organization that any of those 4 areas really stand out as major issues, or where employees might say that they perceive these are core issues? So tell me your thoughts of those 4 bias areas: individual, philosophical, relational, positional. What do you think people would say? Yeah, I see bias, or I perceive that. What do you think there? So I'll let you add that. But I will tell you real quickly, if you're interested in the handout, we didn't have time to go over all the details of the 12 categories here, but I'm happy to send you that handout, and I can go ahead and send that to Phil too, and you can add that to your library. But there's my email, smore@wolfprairie.com. I'll put my email up at the end as well, but we'll make sure that you get that if you would like to see that. All right, I'll end the poll here shortly, just a second too longer. But I think this is really interesting to see where each person in each group sees that there might be potential issues there. Take this with you as you're evaluating your own organization and maybe where you might want to add value. Okay, so let's talk about, why does this happen? Let's assume that maybe at this point you're convinced that you do have lenses of bias, like many of us, but you may not know which ones you wear, but by now you agree along with everyone else that you have them. It might be interesting to know why these happen and really where do they come from. Unconscious biases start in childhood. Once a person is placed in an environment with people, values, culture, there will be biases. They are passed on. Biases come from our caregivers, their beliefs, the type of hometown we grew up in, any experiences that happen to us in those formative years, like school, church, neighborhood, friends groups. With that, please remember, we didn't choose our parents or our grandparents. We didn't select the social groups or church or schools that we attended, or even who our friends could be, what that friend pool might look like. All these things make us who we are and influence how we think about the people around us. And what's interesting is, even if some people feel very similar to me, because our experiences are so different, our influences are definitely different. Our invisible influences do look different. And that's really what shapes our comfort zone over time. So I can't go much further without kind of talking about the causes of unconscious bias and explaining it a little bit more. So sit back and relax. We'll do a Brain Science 101 class fairly quickly here, so we put a good framework in place. Our brains are amazing. They really are. Unconscious biases are like the operating system of a computer running in the background of our brains. You know, it's interesting. Our brains really are neural networks that are constantly bombarded with information. They say that 99.9996 of that information is unconscious. We cannot perceive all that information at once. So our brain was designed to help us to have these automatic unconscious reactions. If it didn't, I'm afraid we'd go maybe insane within a matter of moments having to process that amount of information. So over time, because of our personal experiences, and especially as we grew up, we developed these neural pathways in our brains to navigate the world. These pathways created ruts or shortcuts in our thinking. And remember, this was really designed as a good thing, right? It was designed to protect us. But in modern day, especially in today's society and culture, we now can recognize it does not always serve us well. Over time, these neural pathways allow us to form something like individual brain talk. These are the ruts or automatic responses. They can be assumptions, they can be attitudes, they can be actions towards others in the way that we think. And these are really default responses. And so these neural pathways are what cause us to fall victim to many types of biases. What's interesting in my work as an HR consultant and trainer, I believe that the way discrimination and harassment currently plays out in the workplace really starts by what's called microaggressions and micro inequities. You know, when I went over the 12 bias categories, I failed to make the point that of those categories, they're not equal. Right now, we know that we have been having an ongoing issue with a variety of those things and where there's a lot of inequities. And I don't want to minimize that element with racial injustice and racial, lots of stuff that we have to deal with, not only personally, but definitely in the workplace. Please know that those categories are there to kind of get us thinking about what areas might we be wearing biases. And some create more issues and are more significant and have more impact than others. So I would like to point that out because it makes me think about how often are we seeing some of the areas of discrimination and harassment playing out in the workplace? Well, I think they start as these microaggressions. What they are comments, maybe they're actions that are very, very subtle. They're very unconscious, oftentimes unintentional communication that we have towards others. And they really show our lenses of bias. But what's interesting, it's what other people see. So it's those lenses of bias that other people do see. It originally started from a psychiatrist during the 1960s who was studying race. And he discovered that these microaggressions, these comments, you can see them listed there. I'm not going to read them all out to you, but if you tell someone, some of those, what are you? You can see the person with that picture there. They're just comments that are said over time, and it feels like death by 1,000 cuts, because one comment might not be so hurtful, but over time, it really communicates how someone feels and looks at an individual. Sometimes I think about this subtitle of a New York bestseller that it said, it's not about what you say, it's about what people hear. I would go further and say it's not about what is said, it's how you say it. Words have power. And so people interpret it, it creates meaning. Often the way you say it has such an impact. It's interesting, there was a healthcare medical study where they studied Black patients' interpretations of their healthcare provider's attitude. And those that had taken the implicit bias test and those physicians that were high on unconscious bias, the patients felt like they were less at the center of their care. And it was interesting because it created issues where it was very difficult, like from a practical standpoint, those who felt like they were being treated differently, they had a hard time remembering what the doctor told them. They had less confidence in their treatment plan. And they really thought it was more difficult to follow the recommendations. So it talks about, when we talk about microaggressions amongst coworkers or in the healthcare industry, we're talking about patient care there, it impacts the way that we relate and how people feel when they're within our organizations. I'll tell you real quickly as I'm moving on to the antidote for microaggressions, which is micro affirmations and micro appreciations. It's kind of the opposite, but I often say, if you want to talk to me after a training, I'll absolutely stay after. And I recently had someone do that. And they were an African-American male who was in a professional environment. And what was interesting to me is he told me that, I often have to fit in. I'm expected to change who I am. If I come into work and I have dreadlocks, or I decide to do my hair what is natural to my cultural, I've been hit with lots of comments like, hey, Snoop Dogg, and different variety of connotations of comments that to him felt very dismissive. It minimized him as an individual because he was being who he was, and he did not want to be associated with, in the comment I shared with you, like a rapper in that situation. But it is a reminder that those comments, how people interpret it, what they hear, and especially when these comments are made over time, people do start to feel those biases and see the lenses in others. Well, the way that I find is super helpful to combat that is these comments. They're small, informal actions or statements that express gratitude. They communicate value and demonstrate acceptances of differences. And so you can see some examples there of what you could say to an individual to really communicate that you do value them. And that helps to combat some of the other things that we might experience in the workplace. But before I move on, I just want to mention what we call the danger zone for unconscious bias. Even after we become aware of our own tendencies, we can easily slip back into this. It happens when we're tired or stressed, we're under time constraints. And I don't know about you, but I feel like our world, we get more and more of this. More is put on our plate, and we tend to go back into habits that don't serve us or our organization well. I'll tell you a story about myself this week that I'm slightly, well, not slightly, I am embarrassed. I had a call with someone who was a recent graduate. So our age felt very different on the categories. We were very different. And once I got into that meeting, I realized I had not prepared to the level that I normally would for this type of interaction. And I think if I was honest, it was because I minimized the importance, felt like I could be less formal, and I didn't give it the amount of attention that it deserved. And I realized that normally I would have done more research on the individual and their company, and I had failed to do that. As much as I'm embarrassed of that, I'm so grateful for that, because it's opened my eyes to see an area that I would have never, ever thought I had a bias in. I would have never told you that I have an age bias, because the ironic thing is that I started working for a Fortune 100 company right out of high school. I worked and went to college, and I was very early in my career and doing these things that I was forced to do, and got right into the workforce. And so it's just ironic that I could have been in that position and that I would feel anything but ultimate respect and honor for that person. So I had a lesson learned, and I hope that I will take that and then make sure that I don't fall into that ever again. All right. And if I ever do, then I've got the tools to kind of help me manage it. Okay, so why are we going to focus on these at work? Well, in general, there are two very basic and profound reasons to work on our biases at work. It definitely leads to better culture and work environment and better results. There have been plenty of studies within organizations where when you have diverse, inclusive, equitable, and respectful organization, they outperform others in many ways. So I want to kind of continue down this path of better culture, better results by talking about a few things. These things should not be surprising, but when we have people of all types and they're treated fairly, respectfully, without the impact of implicit bias, generally this does lead to better teamwork, cohesiveness, also acceptance in our relationships. When we look at this, here's a typical list of all the things that employers, when we address bias in the workplace, that they will see. It will reduce conflict, reduce stress, lower absenteeism, all those things that really help us to manage a great place to work. But in the medical field, we know that the consequences in providing healthcare and having biases, it's even more significant. Here's a few studies that the statistics are kind of difficult to hear, but one study found that Black and Hispanic patients, they were significantly less likely than whites to receive pain medication, even for acute injuries like bone fractures. Another study found that physicians were less likely to treat suicidal ideations in elderly patients, despite the fact that those 85 and older had the second highest rate of suicide of any age group. And then, of course, there have been many studies to show the differences between how genders are treated over time related to giving treatment options and all kinds of things. And so it sounds like you're in your organizations, you're highly aware of this. We actually rolled this program out to a medical university this year. And so I think sometimes these biases, you're trained to not have any prejudice, but we realize that we're all human. And so since you're aware of those things shouldn't be a surprise, but it is a reminder of how significant this is for our organizations and being in the healthcare for your patients. So as we continue to talk about why focus on these at work, let's talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion and the connection with bias. Well, DEI is intended to help make sure organizations are characterized by words that are listed there in the target. We see diversity, inclusion, equity, fairness, compassion, acceptance, value, respect, trust, and belonging. I want to work for an organization like that, right? Isn't that what we want? We want all people to do that. And with that, one of the things that I want to kind of give you as a perspective is that when biases come in, those unconscious behaviors, thoughts, attitudes, those types of things, if they're unaddressed and unintercepted, they often act as a headwind that holds back our diversity and inclusion efforts. So when we work to remove those biases from ourselves and our workplaces, we do allow our diversity and inclusion efforts to really work. Dealing with those unconscious biases, they do attach a turbocharger, like an engine, to diversity and inclusion and equity efforts in that. So they definitely can be felt more when we deal with biases. Okay, here's my next poll question for you. Why do you most think your organization should focus on lenses of bias? Let me share that with you. All right, so why do you think, and each individual organization is going to be different, but do you think it's increased productivity, reduced absenteeism, improved employee experience, increased diversity, and maybe it's something else altogether? But identify those, because that will help you to determine, where could I go back to my organization, to my office, and maybe make a difference. Okay, we're headed on to our next section here. I'll give you just a minute before I share those results. But now it's time to talk about the special role of leadership and managers in an organization and when it comes to bias. I'll go ahead and end this poll, so I'll share it with you. You can see that most people are looking to improve the employee experience. And I think that is absolutely, as you're talking, especially in my world of HR folks and clients, that actually does bring in many of those other elements as well. So, all right, thanks for sharing. I'm going to go ahead and stop that. Hope you got to see that and make a note of your own responses. But with that, if you supervise even one other person, you have a significant role and responsibility. And you're really do need to be aware of areas that could cause issues and recognize areas for potential bias. Here's a simple equation for understanding the importance of leadership and management when it comes to issues of biases. Lenses of bias plus power that comes from their position of authority equals trouble. All right, here's the equation. And then the trouble, let me show you those kind of primary areas that do come up when we talk about this. The first one is at the top of the list is recruiting and selection. That's going to tie into your diversity efforts. The next ones, when you look at the rest of them, they have a lot to do with the employee experiences, policy development, problem solving, and decision making. That plays out every day, all day, and is so significant. Another key area that we see biases showing up is setting and evaluating performance standards. And then our work relationship. And then the last one that's significant is employee retention and job satisfaction in general. I don't have enough time to spend on each one of those categories, but if you evaluate each one of those and you think in terms of what's going on in your organization, thinking through what employees might be experiencing or perceiving, that will give you a clue of what you might want to step in and find some strategies to mitigate some of these biases. But I'm going to take a couple here to address. The first one is recruiting. When we interview people and we ultimately select those positions, bias really has an opportunity to come up. I'll tell you about my own personal story. Like I told you, I started early in my career working, and I was thrown into HR a few years after that, but I did a lot of recruiting. And what's interesting is I have a brother who's 10 years younger than I am. He's super cute and adorable. He's got red hair, freckles, and I think he's amazing. But I had this natural bias towards people that looked like him. So they would come across at an interview, and it was strange. I just had a natural warmth towards them, or I thought they just felt more qualified. And I think that's really fascinating. I was grateful to very quickly in my HR career get training, and bias was part of that. And I could start to recognize, you know what, I do feel more comfortable with that person, and this is why. And so once I realized that, what I had to do was, okay, I have to make objective requirements for this job. And you may experience this too. Often you'll see it if somebody goes to the same school. I mentioned that earlier. That's a big one. You're from the same area of the country. Those can also play out that way. Here's another one I think you'll find interesting from the medical community. You'll see here there's Dr. Quinn Capers at Ohio State. You may be familiar with his work on implicit bias, but he had 140 members of his admissions committee. They took the IAT, which is the implicit association test. It's through Harvard, and you might be familiar with it. They took the black-white association test there. And what they found is that amongst all groups, the men, women, students, and faculty, they displayed significant levels of white preference. A couple of other interesting things that they learned was that about half of them felt after taking that test that they were more aware of their biases. And then 21% believed that those knowledge that they learned from that would help them make better decisions moving forward. So armed with those results, he and his team set out to make some tangible changes in their process of admitting students. And here's what they did. They removed photographs and really any information that would give kind of those categories of bias that people might naturally see, and they removed those. They also removed all the tests, the academic records and GPAs before presenting it to the admissions committee to minimize some of those biases that might be there. And then what is I think the key takeaway from a practical standpoint, since many of us probably aren't in this capacity, is that they would have these people that were on the committee retake that test on an annual basis. And then right before they interviewed, they created a cheat sheet with the key things to remember of, okay, I'm going to judge based on these criterias. I'm going to be very specific. And I think what that did was it opened someone's eyes to the possibility. And then there was reinforcement that happened on an annual basis. And then right before I went into an interview, the individual would know, yeah, I've got to make sure that I'm picking based on these specific categories. I'm tripping over my words a little bit, but with that, when we're looking at selecting people, that really is the key. Like they did, they found ways to solidify that structured criteria of what they're going to measure the candidates' qualifications. And they made sure that they stayed true to what skills, experiences, and capabilities they needed from that individual. So, all right, there's lots of ways we can do that, but get thinking about recruiting, because that's often one of the biggest areas that we do struggle with as an organization and in the workplace. Okay, the other area I'd just like to touch on is relationships. Biases can impact with whom we form relationships and those that we give more information and attention to. And when we're talking about employee experiences, I think this is really key to get leaders in your organization to be trained on, maybe I'm handling this situation in a way that might be biased, and maybe it's through my communication. You'll see here under this one, we have 3 C's that I think are key to effective relationships. And the first one is communicating what I say through my tone, the choices of words I use, even my body language, my eye contact, how much I listen and how I respond. That communication is really key in establishing a professional relationship. Collaboration is another key here. Who we choose to invite to meetings, involve in problem solving, maybe even giving them a special assignment or being on a committee. Oftentimes, if we have a bias, we just have a natural tendency to ignore someone's input or get their feedback. And when you start to look at your own personal biases, you might be able to see where that might be coming into play. And then the third one is connection, how we form meaningful workplace relationships and how we work with each other. This is really at the heart of a good workplace culture. I'll tell you, connection is so important. When I shared with you at the beginning of my career, what's fascinating is 5 of those years at that organization, I worked with people that were very, very different than myself. We all were in different seasons of life, different religions, different backgrounds, but we were able to use really those 3 C's to form a relationship that made us so much more effective in the workplace and to be able to tackle the challenges we did in the HR field, to the point that now, 2 decades later plus, we still keep together. And we often say, you know, that was one of the highlights of our careers. But I really think it wasn't that that we were superstars by any stretch of the imagination, but we really found ways to see value in each other, remove our biases, and find a genuine connection and build that professional relationship. So it's key to all those things we talked about. And for my personal experience, I think it's key to being successful. Okay, biases, they impact who we form relationships with. So the key takeaway here is to ensure fair treatment and reduce that risk of looking like there's favoritism, and ultimately creating that great culture. Let's focus on it and see where bias might come into play. So those were the 6 key areas that I think bias comes up, and then we as leaders can take strategies to mitigate those. And with that, here's my last poll question for you. And it's really designed to get you thinking of those 6 areas: recruiting, selection, policy development, problem solving and decision making, the performance standards and evaluation. That topic is dear to my heart. I wish we had time to talk about that, because that's one of those areas where we don't realize it, but there's a lot of bias there. There was a study done where like 60% in a tech field, their differences between male and female, more females received negative comments towards character than their male counterparts. So there's a lot of opportunity to make sure that we're evaluating some standards there. But work relationships, retention, and job satisfaction, you can see we're pretty even out here as we're looking at these variety of things. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. And I know I did that pretty fast, but again, this is really to get you thinking on this path of where people in your organization, those leaders, where we might need a little bit of help, of training or guidance. When I talk about HR issues in general, so many of the things that organizations struggle with, they start with training managers, making sure they know what's expected within your organization. And when it comes to unconscious bias, I encourage you, if you haven't already, do train your managers. Hire someone. We do this training, but also if you don't choose us, choose somebody, because this is such an important topic. Okay, so we got to go on to our final topic of what can we do about them? What are we going to do? So our steps to clearer vision. Most of us are where that star is right now. We're in that acceptance. We can see that, yeah, we probably do have it. We've set aside some of that defensiveness, and we're starting to accept ownership over some of our biases. The next step to clear vision is really taking specific action to rewire our brains and behaviors. With that, as you keep going down this path, adoption, you're going to take on new habits, new ways of thinking as you're going through that. And then the final step is that accountability, where we can be open to saying, hey, I've got these issues. Will you help me make sure, if you see my lens of bias coming on, will you call me out on it? But most of us are really at that point, we're trying to figure out, okay, what action can I take? And this is the bias mitigation strategies. So I'm going to take a few minutes here to talk about this. When we take action to deal with our unconscious bias, we start to retrain our brains. Imagine you have a rainwater problem on the side of your house. Over time, it creates a rut. And every time the rain comes, it erodes the soil, but it follows the same path every single time. All right, what could you do? Well, I actually did have this happen at a home. And what we could do is what we did for a while. We hoped the rain would never return. We saw that puddle start small, and over time it grew, and we knew it was not good for our property value, but we just kind of hoped it maybe would go away. Our neighbor had the same problem, but we even, the funny thing is not only did we watch it grow, but we became where we almost liked it. By the time we'd get big puddles, my kids would go out, they jump around and play in it. But hopefully we don't want our biases to get to that extreme. Another thing we could do is we just kind of wait to see maybe the rain will fall a different way. Well, that never happened on my driveway. Or the last one, what could we do? We could do something. We could reroute the rainwater to a better, less destructive path. And that's what we eventually did in our home. We hired an expert, we got a French drain in, and we were able to mitigate that. So the puddle was taken care of. But I let that go on for close to 6-7 years before I took action. We can't erase old ways of thinking, but we can rewrite over them with new ones. With this, when we talk about this concept of writing over them, taking action like we did in the taking a French drain and getting it handled, what's interesting is that we still had to maintain it. There was a place where leaves could get in, and so I had to clean it out every so often. And it's a little bit like what we saw at Ohio State. They would remind the interviewers what was expected so that they kept their mind focused on, okay, I had this tendency towards bias. What can I do? As we retrain our brain through those frequent reminders about what's true, this is really key. It's interesting to me, the FBI trains agents to recognize counterfeit money by having them spend an extraordinary amount of time handling the real thing, right? So when they encounter the fake one, they know it right away. So let's retrain our brain to what is true. This happens through a few things that I think are key and have helped me along my journey, which is self-reflective questions. I also review examples of reality and truth. If I see an article or hear something, I flip it and I think, okay, would I feel differently, or would I think differently if this is a person of a different race, a different religion, anything different, and I flip it. And that helps me to see that I might have a bias in that area. And then visual prompts and reminders. So daily reflective questions, and we have just a few more minutes here as we're kind of ending our time together. And I see someone did mention that they have to jump off. So I'm not sure when that popped in, but Linda, thank you for the message. I appreciate that. And if you have to jump off or something, feel free to reach out to me after. I'm happy to share the final thoughts here with you. But one of the things we do in Wolf Prairie, we have these sets of 22 cards that there's one for every day of the work week in a month, every day of the work day in a month, so about 22. And they have these questions on them, like, do I allow and encourage others to be themselves around me? Or things like, are my past experiences influencing how I'm treating others? And then here's another one that's an example. Am I kind and caring towards people whose beliefs are different from me? And there's a lot of different questions, but when we talk about these, they create sometimes a moment of silence where we're doing some self-reflection, but other times it creates some unique thoughts and a good conversation. And so have these questions that you ask yourself is often helpful. And please know, another things to think about is we retrain our brain through understanding, exposure, and experiences with those that are different from ourselves. That's where we begin to change our comfort zone pattern. One of the best ways I found is ask those questions, get involved with others, that proximity interaction, the questions come in with curiosity and having those conversations, but be proactive in involving others that are different than you. And as we look at that, here's just one way you could do that. You could take steps every day by finding someone who is different from you at work, maybe in a significant way, and you make an effort to do something with them, have a conversation. Most of us aren't. Some of us are in the office, some of us aren't. I know a lot of you probably are in the office, but finding a way to connect to people who are different than you in the organization. Also, this is exciting. There is new technology coming for employers that will help us in this area. One of our clients is Big Brothers Big Sisters of Kansas City, and what they have recently implemented is a technology called Shaka. You can find their information, joinshaka.com. I'm not affiliated, but I think this is great, so that's why I'm sharing it. But what it's designed to do is to help the culture and that employee experience to connect with people, either in other departments or people that are just, they don't normally work with. And what it does is it's totally automated. It looks at two people's calendars, suggests a time for them to meet, and then it provides questions so that I can learn about you from a professional standpoint. And then there's some personal questions as well that kind of give someone a framework to, let me get to know you, let me kind of make a connection. And you can do it up to between 2 and 4 people. And our organization that we work with, they've really found it to be very beneficial, and it was part of their design to handle unconscious bias in the workplace. So I love that concept. It's new technology. It's just out there. I think it's the best kept secret. Another technology that's new that I found over the summer was this technology called Run the World, where they do virtual technology, but they match people up in a setting where it's almost like speed dating, but it's for me to get to know within a few minutes somebody or get exposure. And so there's so much out there, so much that we can do as employers to continue this path of helping people expand their comfort zone and expand their exposure. So here I go with the final question here, a few more slides as we finish up here. But will you go forward from here with the goal to understand your own invisible influences? That's my question for you. Consider ways that you can retrain your brain. Begin to remove those lenses of bias that distort what's real. Now let's start to see others as they really are, the valuable, unique individuals that are worthy of respect, honor, and equitable treatment. This really is what we see as diversity of thought, perspective, background, upbringing, and experiences. When we start to recognize those in others, I think we're going to have a better culture, better results for our organization. So what is your next steps? You can see the slide that talked about those steps to clear vision on the corner there, but action and adoption. Consider as you go back to your organization, those questions that I ask you, look at those key areas. What part of my organization do I need to focus on? What area do employees kind of perceive might be in those bias areas, those bias categories? And then what type of strategies am I going to implement? Recruiting was at the top of most of our lists, making sure that my selection process is very objective and does everything it can to remove biases. So with that, create a personal and organization strategies to mitigate those invisible influences. Well, I thank you so much for your time, for taking this topic seriously. If you want to reach out, there's my contact information, smore@wolfprairie.com. I will get the documents to Phil so he can send that to you, but feel free to connect by any means, and also out on LinkedIn if you want. But then you'll see there's a QR code there if you want to take a picture and you want to submit a survey about what we did today, what your thoughts were. You can tell my boss how great I did or tell him how terrible I did. That's an anonymous survey that you can take as well. So any questions that you have for me, or any thoughts or perspectives you'd like to share? And I'm not sure, Michelle and Phil, I'll look at the chat, but any thoughts or anything you'd like to talk about?
We'll give a couple of seconds for questions. You can unmute yourself if you'd like to ask a question.
Thank you, Anita. I appreciate that. I always appreciate the encouragement. Thank you for having me. It's always fun to talk about these topics that are so core to being a good, healthy workplace. So, and thank you, Glenda. I appreciate that as well. And let's see, any questions that we see coming through? Let's see, great topic. Thank you, Jill. I appreciate it very, very much. And we've got another thank you for the great information. I appreciate it. This topic is definitely dear to my heart. It's something I was aware of very early on in my career. I was fortunate that helped me to remove my lenses of bias. But as I gave my own personal example, I'm I'm in the process as well. And so we each grow better and we become better versions of ourselves, we hope, each day. At least that's my goal, and want to be a good workplace. Okay, let's see. Thanks so much. Thank you very much for the kind words. I appreciate that. Michelle, anything else or anything else?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, Stephanie, very much for this awesome presentation today. I think it's very applicable to what we do every single day, and we can put some of your suggestions into motion immediately. As a reminder, slides will be available in the document library of the MGMA Kansas website in about 2 weeks. The presentation will also be available on the MGMA Kansas YouTube channel. Please remember to subscribe to the channel. We still need to get our numbers up a little bit. And also, as a reminder for those who have the CMPE, that you can claim a CMPE credit towards watching this live webinar today. It does count towards MGMA face-to-face credit. And as we mentioned last time, there are 6 remaining membership scholarships remaining, courtesy of David Kreller with MetaWaste, $50 towards a new membership. If you're not a new member, or you know somebody who performs managerial duties or performs administrative responsibilities, please encourage them to join MGMA Kansas and take advantage of David's generosity. So we have 6 left, so hurry. Upcoming in December, our next webinar is December 3rd at 12 o'clock. It will be on 2021 CPT updates, new and revised and deleted CPT codes. Everybody loves that, and that's going to be presented by Brenda Edwards. And December 17th, we're going to have a 12 o'clock meeting again for latest legal concerns. So please go out to the MGMA website, MGMA Kansas, sorry, I have to get used to that website, and join for those meetings. There's a lot of great information. As you know, we're trying to provide monthly webinars in lieu of the in-place fall conference. So we're still working on how we're going to handle the spring conference, but we'll keep you up to date with all of that. And thank you once again to our November webinar sponsor, MedPro Group. Thank you guys all for joining us today.